Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of the Royal Blue Podcast. I'm your host, Conor O'Neill, joined today by Joe Thomas and Gavin Buckland as we look back on Everton's disappointing, but not too down, 3-0 defeat to Manchester City Goodison Park on Sunday afternoon. A brace from Ilkay Gundogan and a header from Erling Haaland. The difference, the result pretty much means everything's still to play for as we head into the final two games of the Premier League season. And Joe, you were alongside me at Goodison yesterday, and although the Blues were beaten, they were certainly not disgraced.
They certainly weren't disgraced, no. I mean, I think it was a game that... It's weird because it was a game that played out, I think, precisely how most of us expected it to play out. And bearing in mind how unexpected what had happened at Brighton was, maybe our expectations should have been slightly different. But, you know, I don't think many people expected Everton to get too much from that yesterday. I thought they were good to start with. I thought there were shades of Newcastle at home and Arsenal away, where they were playing against what's obviously a better side. And for the first 30, 35 minutes, they were competitive, arguably even the better side. Obviously, we know they had the chance with Mason Holgate. I thought it was a very good chance live. I tweeted that. I got a lot of people saying that isn't a very good chance at all. It's really difficult for him. I'm on the fence now. I've seen replays. I can definitely understand why, you know, it ended up not going in the back of the net. But I also just kind of think, if only he just anticipated it a little bit better. It was close. It was a big chance. But up until the point of the first goal, which really came out of nothing, and it was, you know, a sublime piece of individual skill. Up until that point, it was relatively comfortable for Everton, or it conceded a lot of possession. But City didn't have a lot of chances, and Everton were causing a few problems with their press on the break. So, you know, I thought he set up probably as well as he could. Obviously, Holgate comes in for Mykolenko. With Godfrey injured, probably isn't an alternative. I suppose the only other alternative is put Patterson at left back.
Don't go too much into, because we are going to get into that later, because I think it's a big debate that I think is going to grow as the week goes on.
But I think given the circumstance, it was understandable how Everton ended up in the situation where that was the starting lineup. And I thought for the most part, you know, they tried hard and they lost it because a far better side just scored 2 goals out of nothing 10 minutes before half-time and finished the game off a few minutes later. Obviously, I don't think we learned anything new about Everton's plight from that game. Probably the big questions, which is something else we're going to come on to clearly, is now 1, Dominic Calvert-Lewin, 2, Vitaly Mykolenko, and then 3, David Moyes and West Ham.
That's the agenda. But no, Gav, I think, you know what Joe says there in terms of that little bit of class, that a lot of that class that City have got was shown in that first goal, wasn't it? Because it was a tight opening, 35 minutes. Everton arguably had the best chance, Mason Holgate, but then, Gundogan just produces something out of nothing, and all of a sudden Everton are behind and a little bit kind of maybe all over the place and are punished again then a couple of minutes later from Erling Haaland.
Yeah, he got into a similar position earlier in the half, hasn't he, Gundogan, at the edge of the 6-yard box in the same part of the pitch. Maybe Patterson should have done a little bit more, perhaps, in anticipating where the ball was going. But yeah, Gundogan, he's in great form at the moment, isn't he? And he's been brilliant for them last few weeks, and he was brilliant yesterday. He's man of the match by a distance, and you can't legislate for that, really. And then, as you say, I thought the second goal was the killer. But I mean, I know we've had problems over people saying about poor marking, but watch Haaland's movement when when the ball, before the ball's crossed, he gallops across the penalty area like something I've never seen before from a football player, just to get himself in position. And you can't really mark that. He made, I know it looks so he's unmarked, but his pace, and he's in that position so quick that it's impossible to pick him up. And that was the killer. Yeah, and I know Joe was talking about Arsenal and Newcastle. I'd agree. Where I think yesterday was more positive in both those games, we collapsed to a certain degree, didn't we? We never got that impression yesterday that was going to happen. Indeed, I think maybe because City got a game midweek as well. The second half we were quite bright when it went 3-0, and you never felt that the players were, had given up. And think, let's face it, they're the best team on the planet. They'll probably get beat by Real Madrid now this week. But yeah, they're one of the greatest teams you've ever seen in this country. And I thought we acquitted ourselves well. And as you say, moments of genius after 30-odd sterile minutes ultimately started City's march to victory.
We will come into the game and different parts of it, Joe. But just to look back on when it goes 3-0, because obviously me and you sit next to each other in the press box, and I must admit, having looked at goal difference before the game, and then when the ball hits the back net after the third, I was a little bit worried, thinking this could very quickly now become 4, 5, possibly 6, because of whoever they're playing and the fine array of attacking talent that Manchester City have got, headed by the fact that one of the clinical goal scorers we're probably ever going to see in football leads the line. How pleasing was it to kind of see that Everton kind of regroup, stuck in, got the shape, kind of Cody come on, and Everton kind of shore things up a little bit from a defensive point of view, but they didn't crumble, they didn't fall apart, and they weren't beaten 4 or 5, 6. It stayed 3-0, and that goal difference still looks a lot better today than what it possibly could have done.
It was obvious to City that they'd won it. I know whilst they're obviously playing a second string, well, not quite a second, but they'd made a few changes with Real Madrid in mind coming up, and obviously further tests in the title race. I think they took their foot off the pedal, and obviously it's pleasing that Everton didn't collapse, but I don't think they were under any real pressure in that last half an hour, those last 40 minutes, and unfortunately as well, whilst it could have been so much worse, I think the damage has been done with the goal difference. They had a 4-goal head start on Leeds. That's effectively worth an extra point. Now it's just 1. That's still useful, but that's a lot closer than we'd like it to be. Now, there's a degree of, you could argue there's a degree of inevitability with that. Chances are you're going to lose to Man City, and you don't want it to become a cricket score. But when you compare, and Leeds were very fortunate that this was the case, I think, but just one of the many, many narratives and the many kind of juxtapositions that we may end up looking back on may be that Leeds scored that late goal at Man City last weekend and lost 2-1, whereas Everton have lost 3-0, and all of a sudden that's almost conceded an extra point in the title race. I think Leeds have scored more goals than Everton as well. I think everyone bar Southampton now has pretty much scored more goals than Everton. So and that's what it comes down to. Should they finish level on points and goal difference? I think so. So, yeah, I think pleased would be the wrong word. Obviously, Sean Dyche was quite positive about the final 35 minutes. I think, to be perfectly honest, that it was just, by that point, it was almost like Everton knew the game was lost, Man City knew the game was won, and they just played out 30 minutes, and it was, we both got bigger fish to fry now, let's save ourselves for then.
So essentially we all wasted 30 minutes of our lives.
I think so. I think
stage you're watching an exhibition game, as they like to call it, an exhibition 30 minutes.
I think if Sean Dyche and Pep Guardiola could have shaken hands in 65 minutes and brought everyone off the pitch, I think they would have done. And I think probably every fan there on both sides would have probably been going, I might get home for me Sunday dinner a bit quicker. So,
Gavin, in terms of like the goal difference and stuff like that, I know I seen last night there was a few people kind of talking about goal difference, saying, well, why are we worrying? But this is a factor that could come into play, isn't it? It's something that is worth keeping an eye on and being aware of, because there's a very strong possibility that it could come into play in the next couple of weeks.
Oh, yeah. It's fine margins, isn't it? It goes back to, 97, 98, how close it was with Bolton. And, but at the same time, Leeds winning 1-0 and got a penalty on Saturday to make it 2-0 after half an hour against Newcastle team who were obviously struggling. And you would have taken a point there, wouldn't you, at that stage, for Leeds? So you can pick positives and negatives to suit your mood in this, can't you? That's what we tended to do, or everybody's been doing. And I look at it like that was a decent result for us, the Leeds game. To be fair, given those circumstances, I know they scored to make it 2-2, but had to settle for that. Yeah, you just got, but ultimately it's still largely in our own hands, and we've got to make sure that goal difference doesn't become an issue. And I think we've got. I know I get City taking the foot off the gas, but it's good to see that after two decent, not two extraordinary great performance at Brighton on the back of a decent performance at Leicester, we sort of carried that mindset and that organisation from those two matches and belief in a little bit of fight from those two games into the Manchester City game. Because, I mean, that's 7 times City have beaten us on the run at Goodison. And I think in the vast majority of those games, we set out at the start quite clearly to make it a damage and imitation exercise, but you never got that sense of that yesterday, did you? And I think it was so we kept our momentum, even though we got beat 3-0. No, that sounds like an oxymoron, but we sort of kept that momentum of fight and belief from those two away matches into the City game, and I think that takes us into the Wolves game in good heart and the Bournemouth game. So I believe that goal difference won't be an issue because I think we'll be clear based on what I've seen of the last 3 games.
I think, Joe, in terms of the big talking points from the game, one of them arrived before kick-off, before the ball was even kicked, when team news came in and Vitaly Mykolenko was out the matchday squad and Mason Holgate come in at left back. Obviously, later transpired that Mykolenko picked up a groin injury in training on Saturday, and it appears from what Sean and I've seen that it happened very late into the session and perhaps derailed Everton's plans a little bit because they were unable to change too much of what they'd been working on given the time and such around the injury before the game had to play. I think Mason Holgate's had a tough couple of weeks, and that toughness continued yesterday. I think after about 10 minutes, it was quite clear that City's game plan was to switch to play and get Mahrez in behind him. And I think I tweeted myself after about 5 or 15 minutes saying it could be a bit of a torrid afternoon for the defender at left back. But the fact that Mykolenko could be out, we don't know if he will be out, but he could be out next Saturday, is a major concern because quite clearly Everton have a problem on that left-hand side if he's not available.
Yeah, I think it's a thigh injury, I think, with Mykolenko. And
so, yeah, Tom's
obviously asked Sean about the extent of it. Yes, and he said that they were going to have to wait and see this week. So I think that, probably on Mykolenko and on Dom, there'll be a few murmurs over the course of the next few days, but it's probably going to be the press conference. Judging how everything went the last time Dominic Calvert-Lewin was injured, I think it's probably going to be Thursday before we actually get any insight from how things are going on that perspective. And I think that there have been points in this season where I don't think Mykolenko would necessarily have been a massive loss. I think, like most Everton players, he's had an up and down season, and there have been times when, obviously, we know Godfrey was chosen ahead of Mykolenko initially after Mykolenko's illness, and then he retained his spot. And there were games in which it made sense for Godfrey to be there ahead of Mykolenko. Well, Godfrey isn't an option at the minute because he's injured. And again, I asked Sean Dyche about him yesterday. He didn't get the sense that there's much hope that Godfrey's going to be back fit for the end of this week. And then it comes down to, I think that Mykolenko could be a much bigger issue than perhaps I would initially have thought it would have been if it is that he's out for a sustained period of time. I've got nothing to say that he is. I genuinely don't know. Because when you look at that side now, what do you do without Mykolenko? Now, yesterday they played Holgate. Holgate struggled. Okay, he struggled against Mahrez. Mahrez is a wonderful player. But Holgate is just so clearly, he's right-footed, Holgate, and he can't play at right back. He was absolutely, he was rinsed into an early bath by Jordan Ayew. You put him on the left-hand side, it's even harder for him. And I have every sympathy for Holgate. He's not a fullback. But that just doesn't work. And if you don't play Holgate there, then you've got two choices, haven't you? Really, if you stay at 4-4-2. Well, I don't even know what the choices are. You say, everything points towards Dwight McNeil playing either at left back or left wing back, and that's a real concern. You could potentially put Patterson at left back and Holgate at right back, but that's still a problem. Bearing in mind how much Holgate
position as well,
and how much Holgate struggled at right back. So, there just isn't with Coleman also out injured, Godfrey out injured. There just isn't that option. And then you think, well, okay, it might force Dyche to change style. Well, the only style that's worked for Dyche at Everton so far is 4-5-1, so he's got to do that. If he has to put McNeil at left wing back, he's sacrificing one of Everton's most effective players of recent months, one of the most effective attacking outlets, which could be even more significant if Dominic Calvert-Lewin isn't fit. And then you then throw into the mix, obviously, if you're then going to go playing three centre backs, well, Connor Cody isn't available to play against Wolves because obviously he's on loan from that club. So then you're looking at probably, Mina, Tarkowski and Keane. That might not be the worst thing in the world, but essentially you're going into a game where Mikalenko's absence, if it is going to be an absence, forces a lot of square pegs into round holes and a lot of changes at a time when, Everton could really do without them. Like it's kind of almost, a bit of a low key thing, but Mikalenko is a much bigger loss given the injuries of other players now than he would have been at other points in the season, and it is a problem.
Gav, Joe says there in terms of round pegs and square holes. I spoke to Alex Wolby after the game yesterday in the mix zone, and he was kind of quite clear that, although it's unfortunate that Everton picking up injuries, it's not a big concern. Anyone who comes in is capable of doing a job and stuff like that. But I think what Everton fans have seen so far this season is that just because you've got a squad full of players doesn't mean they're capable of doing jobs in positions when called upon. And this is the worst possible time, isn't it, to have square pegs in round holes, because when you need everyone on the pitch in their natural positions, like we've seen how effective it can be, to playing people out of position is just far from ideal.
Yeah, well, especially fullback, which is such an important part of the team's formation now, isn't it? Really, about what they offer, and also, you nullify McNeil's attacking prowess if you're asking them to track back, because you've not got your first choice fullback playing at left back, and then that also causes you a problem. Yeah, and I think some of that is. Should you looking at your recruitment there, getting players who are a bit more flexible and where they can play? I think we said about, don't talk about Moyes, but Moyes had players something like Lescott who could play fullback, and he started fullback, didn't he, then centre half and moved around, And I think Branthwaite is sort of being looked at as like a similar type of player. Yeah, and I agree with Joe. It's just like it's a problem, and some of it is. Some parts of the problem is McNeil's good form, isn't it? That McNeil's being our best player. And you don't want to sort of say nullify his effectiveness by asking him to track back because you've not got your first choice left back playing. If McNeil wasn't in such great form, you'd probably be more happy for him to play in that area. And that's it's funny how these things work out. But yeah, it has to be Wolves, doesn't it, where we can't play. The one game where you might want to play a back three anyway, you can't play Cody. So, that's just another...
Some of Everton's seen so far, essentially.
Yeah, it is funny. Over the last month, we've had Godfrey at right back and left back and Holgate at right back and left back, haven't we?
Yeah.
Which speaks absolute volumes for some of our transfer dealings to say. Ruben Vinagre, discuss.
But he's out. He's obviously not an option.
There's been times when he could have played this season, hasn't it? I know he's out, but that's just he's been. He could have been covered at various points of the season. So yeah, I totally agree with Joe. It's a problem really that Dyche could do without this stage of the season. To be honest with you.
I think as well, isn't it, when you look at like the link up off the back four, even someone like James Tarkowski and probably the last 8 weeks had 3 different centre back partners. Cody, Keane, and then obviously Yerry Mina in recent weeks. So there's been a real lack of consistency, hasn't there, essentially in the back four since probably Arsenal, probably Aston Villa really, when Sean Dyche made the decision to drop Connor Cody for Arsenal. But Gav said there, it's a problem for Sean Dyche that he doesn't want. Another problem emerged at half-time when we all saw Neil Maupay warming up. I certainly saw him warming up and he was stripped and ready to come on. And must admit, I was sitting there thinking, maybe Sean Dyche going to maybe take the game to City, maybe change things up, maybe take instead, worst fears were confirmed when the ball went up and number 9 was off, Dominic Calvert-Lewin, taken off with a tight groin. I think Sean Dyche said afterwards. Seems Dyche seemed to suggest it was a bit of a precaution. He was, didn't really want to take any chances, and he was left with a decision to make and stuff like that. But if we're talking about problems where Everton don't need right now, the centre forward having to come off because he's picked a knock-up, who makes them such a better team, who has missed a large part of the season with injuries, is the last thing that Everton fans wanted.
Yeah, that's the worst injury that Everton could have. quite clearly. And again, this is something we're still waiting for more information on. I must admit, when he didn't come out at half-time, my mind didn't initially race to injury. Like in my head, I thought, oh, that's a kind of, let's protect him, this game's gone. And I thought that if that had been the case, I thought that was actually quite an astute decision, because Everton's, if there is one player that can have, he's the one player that Everton have got that can have the biggest impact on the survival. So, I thought, oh, maybe Deitch is being pragmatic here and just go, well, what's the point in risking him? And I thought that would have been a sensible move. Obviously, we now know that it was injury concern, tightness of groin. Sean Deitch, again, asked him about this after the game. He was saying, well, a precautionary move. So, Dom was apparently happy to play on, which hopefully is an indication that it isn't that serious. So, fingers crossed that's the case. I'm just thinking, I remember asking Sean Deitch about Dominic Calvert-Lewin when he was withdrawn early against Arsenal back in February, and Deitch said it was a precaution, which nobody wants to hear right now. And it's only just occurred to me. So obviously we didn't see him for 10 games after that. So
Joe Thomas with the perfect pick me up Monday message to the supporters.
so yeah, but hopefully. Yeah, hopefully everything's okay. Again, we're gonna have to wait and see how it is over the coming days. But I think that, everybody knows it. Nobody who is listening to this needs us to talk about the impact on the final 2 games of the season and Everton's approach should Dominic Calvert-Lewin not be fit or not be 100%. We all know the scenario. It doesn't make things impossible, far from it. And the crucial thing is that Decore's around and available, because there were points without Dominic Calvert-Lewin when Everton looked all right going forward with, but only when Decore was there to support Damari Gray. I mean, why it wasn't Damari Gray that came on is an interesting one, bearing in mind that they were much better at places like Forest when Gray was up top rather than Mopé. But I think we're just going to have to wait and see. But we just need to keep everything crossed that Dominic Calvert-Lewin is actually fine and things are going to be okay.
Yeah. Is it a case, Gav, of toes crossed as well as fingers crossed now these next few days heading into Saturday? Because life without Dominic Calvert-Lewin at Everton looks very bleak, doesn't it, on life with him in that team?
Yeah, and I think Decore as well, isn't it? It's not, there's the return of Decore, Mina and Calvert-Lewin collectively has made a big difference for me. So, we'll just have to wait and see. I think Calvert-Lewin, he's I think the worst thing about him since he's come back, don't know whether he's been learning a lot more about the centre forward trade, during his absence, but he looks a far better, more rounded footballer since he come back than before his injury. And even yesterday, he was effective in the first half. And you want that for the last 2 games. And we just, I'd say everything crossed. I'm just thinking, because there's only 2 games left of the season, whether Dyche might be prepared to gamble a little bit more than, say, if there was 10 games left with his fitness, if it's a marginal call. And see where it takes them, because, as I say, the options there are just, we spoke about fullback options. The options up front are limited. But I'd play Gray if it came back to it. I don't really. Well, I think Dyche quite legitimately has had criticism, hasn't he, over some of his tactics and selection, and the sort of getting rid of Gray, who's doing quite a good job as a lone striker, and then playing a front 2 and Sims and stuff. I didn't agree with that, so I'd play Gray if Calvert-Lewin's not fit for Saturday.
Joe, that is one of the real big mysteries, isn't it, of recent weeks, because Damari Gray is someone who can do something else nothing, and quite ironic that, we look back to the goal at the Etihad on New Year's Eve when Everton, drew at Manchester City, where he produced a moment out of nothing. He did do well in them games when he was the lone forward. Okay, things might not be able to hold the ball as well as Calvert-Lewin, but he certainly gave up Everton a bit more options. He got them up the pitch a lot better than what we've seen Neil Mopé do in recent weeks. But for some reason, he just cannot get a look in, can he? And even you think of like Leicester away, Sean Dyche didn't bring him on when perhaps the game's opened up, and he could have made a bit of a difference in the final third, in the final 10 minutes. Then you think of Brighton. I think he never come off. He never made it off the bench in that game either. And then obviously, on Saturday comes on for the kind of on Sunday comes on for the kind of the last 10, 15 odd minutes, but the game was gone and Everton were it was kind of like you said earlier. If Sean Dyche and Pep Guardiola could have shook hands, they probably would have done. It's a bit of a mystery, isn't it? How he has almost fell from grace and almost, and he's so far down the pecking order, seemingly, for Sean Dyche.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if it's that much of a surprise, bearing in mind that once Dominic Calvert-Lewin came back, he's always going to lead the line, and then it's clear that I think we spoke about fullbacks a lot, and I think McNeil and Iwobi as the wide players are partly to help protect the fullbacks who there's often been at least one player out of position covering them over the past 6 weeks or so. So I think once Decore's back and once Calvert-Lewin was back, it made sense, especially once they started to do quite well. They looked good going forward against Leicester. They were exceptional against Brighton. And why would you change that going into Manchester City yesterday? So no, that's not no surprise. But you are right in the sense that, one, things only feel a bit... I don't feel sorry for Sean Dyche, but I can understand why he's been unfortunate in the sense that he stumbled across a winning formula at Everton, and that was doing well. His first 10 games, they took a good haul of points. It was reasonably positive. You go back to 60 minutes in against Tottenham Hotspur, and you're thinking, Everton are on a good run. They were in the ascendancy in that game. Probably would have gone. I genuinely think they would have gone on to have won that game had Decore not got sent off. And once he gets sent off, that changes everything, because Everton have got so few options, and he was so integral to the style of play that Sean Dyche stumbled upon that it was a massive loss. So Sean Dyche didn't change a winning or a positive, successful formula. He was forced to do it, and he was forced to do it with very, very limited alternative options. On the flip side, some of the tactical decisions he made during Decore's absence were baffling. The 4-4-2 at Old Trafford, and then again to then stick with that to start with Fulham. The decisions around persevere with Holgate and Godfrey at right back ahead of ahead of Nathan Patterson was just really, really peculiar. And then you're right, Damari Gray has proven that he can be a nuisance going forward this season under both Frank Lampard and again under Sean Dyche. It was the last option that Dyche went for during Calvert-Lewin's absence. He started with Sims at Anfield, then he went to Maupay, and then he went to Damari Gray, when I think a lot of us probably with our starting point would have been Damari Gray. So that was strange in the first place. But once he got there, it looked like Gray was working well. So it has been interesting that he hasn't had a great involvement. I mean, at Leicester, Sean Dyche makes a point of not making a lot of substitutions. If he had a better bench, I'd like to think he would make more. But he's got Damari Gray there. The last 15 minutes against Leicester was peculiar. Everton did finish that side stronger. So I thought after they rode through a bit of a storm, they finished that game the better side. And McNeil and Iwobi had so much freedom in the middle of the park to push forward in the last 10 minutes. You just thought, Damari Gray's probably got a better end product than both of them. If you put him on with fresh legs and a bit more pace, then so it felt like a bit of an opportunity missed, I think. So it's a peculiar one as to quite where Damari Gray fits into Sean Dyche's frame of mind, and we might find out if Dominic Calvert-Lewin isn't available. But if Dominic Calvert-Lewin isn't available on Saturday for the Wolves game, for me, there's no question that the starting point should be Gray up top by himself.
Is that something? Obviously, Gav, you say there, you will put Gray in. Have you been surprised at how little game time he's had? Because he is, like I said before, he is someone who can produce something out of nothing for Everton, and has actually been a real kind of attacking threat where Everton have struggled to carve out attacking openings, certainly under Frank Lampard. Yeah.
I mean, definitely, those games Joe was alluding to where we played the other players up top. We've discussed this before, whether he doesn't fancy Gray out wide right because of his work rate. I understand that there's probably better options there, but I definitely agree that off the bench he's not been utilised enough as well throughout Dyche's tenure. And it's a bit, but you haven't trusted. That's what I don't really get, because you say it's a question of trust, but Dyche's trusted him to play up front, hasn't he? And he's done a decent job. So he obviously rates him enough as a player to include him in the first team, but I don't think he's done it enough. And the Leicester game was just crying out for that introduction, wasn't it? And 3 points there would have been, we wouldn't be talking about goal difference at the start of the pod, would we really? And yeah, I get that. And it's one of a number of decisions Dyche has taken while he's been here. You think I don't really understand that, but he's definitely got to play on Saturday. And let's see. I think also as well, with Sakura there as well, that we can still retain a little bit of effectiveness. But let's hope, with all our fingers and legs and everything else crossed, that eventuality won't be needed.
In terms of managers making decisions, Joe, a decision made in the capital on Sunday afternoon, I think, raised eyebrows. So certainly you mean the press box when we seen the West Ham team sheet, David Moyes often to make 11 changes to the side that beat AZ Alkmaar on Thursday night for the game against Brentford. Obviously, no real implications for Everton yesterday, but next Sunday, Leeds United visit the London Stadium to take on David Moyes' side. West Ham could potentially be in a European final by that point if they overcome Alkmaar in the second leg on Thursday night. I think that's an interesting... Things about to get interesting, aren't they? Because if he does make them changes again, there will be plenty of scrutiny and questions being thrown to West Ham manager from an Everton perspective.
Yeah, it has the potential to completely change the context of the final weeks of the relegation battle. When I did a piece of Radio 5 Live before the game yesterday, so I heard the West Ham team news as I was on the radio, just before they brought me in. I think, just had that horrible feeling in the pit of my stomach when I heard it, and especially then when I didn't really follow the games. Obviously, I was watching the Everton game, but, by all accounts, it looks like West Ham put up quite a tame performance at Brentford and obviously lost. If West Ham get through on Thursday night, and they should get through, I mean, their budget compared to Alkmaar's, their players they've got available. The fact that they already take a lead into that game, the fact they rested players yesterday, then all of a sudden that's it. It's a final, and it might be 2 weeks away. But that's probably has the potential to be certainly one of the biggest days in David Moyes' managerial career. It's up there, isn't it? And I made this point, I laboured this point perhaps a little bit on Sunday afternoon, and my match report on Everton was actually almost based around what happened in London rather than what happened on Merseyside, because I thought it was told us more about the state of the next few weeks than what was a fairly predictable defeat to Manchester City. It's just a real concern. Like a real concern, because a lot of people in response to what I did were saying, West Ham aren't safe. West Ham still need to do this. They still need to do that. I think West Ham are safe. They're 37 points. They've got a far superior goal difference than most of the teams around them. The circumstances through which West Ham would have to go down from here, even if they were to lose their last 2 games, would be phenomenal, bearing in mind that Forest, Leeds, Leicester and Everton are all behind them. So I think they are safe. And in that context, why would they risk players? You really think that if they get through to that final, they're going to risk Declan Rice against that Leeds midfield, against that Leeds side, which is just bookings galore every single game, like Weston McKennie and Junior Firpo going through people like there's nobody's business. Like, you think they're going to risk like Paqueta and Declan Rice against that, even if it's the final might be another 10 days or 2 weeks away? I'm not sure they will be. And then obviously by the time you get to Leicester, it's the same. So it's a real concern for me, that is, I think. Obviously we're recording this on a Monday afternoon. and it feels like a lot is going to happen before Everton next kick a ball. That's going to tell us between now and Everton, or certainly between now and the team news coming out at 2:00 on Saturday. We're going to find out the extent of Dominic Calvert-Lewin's fitness. We're going to find out the extent of Vitaly Mykolenko's fitness. Leicester play Liverpool tonight, and I think we all sleep a lot easier if Liverpool can beat Leicester again. That would really, really help Everton in this battle. And then obviously you've got that West Ham game on Thursday, which could have a huge impact on the final weeks of the season. So, it's going to be really, really interesting. And, I just think that Everton, whilst it's still largely it's essentially still in Everton's hands. They win their final two games, not definitely staying up, but they're highly, highly likely to stay up. But obviously the chances of doing that, if you start getting injuries to first teamers, reduces, and also the chances of those rivals picking up more points you might initially expect them to do. It's a concern, isn't it? So,
Gav, obviously, with any battle or any fight or any charge towards the title, or whether it be relegation, you've always got to rely on yourself and not worry about everyone else. But Everton could do without David Moyes, an old friend, doing things like this, could he? Because you would like to think that things will stay on a level playing field as much as they can, and everything will remain normal rather than a manager making wholesale changes to what is normally a starting lineup.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, they play Leeds, is it Sunday, is it?
Next Sunday at the London Stadium.
And then obviously Leicester, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, even if they go out of Europe, and I really want Moyes to lift the trophy, I think it'd be great, highlights of his career. But even if they go out, how much would he be trying against Leicester anyway? Really, it's going to be deflating experience, isn't it? Really, or Leeds. So either way, it's going to be a problem whether in the Conference League or not. So yeah, it's just these things, quirky things, have a habit of throwing themselves up from time to time, isn't it? And Moyes is having Everton's Premier League future in his palm of his hand. Is definitely in there, isn't it, really? But let's hope that results on Saturday, and we don't need to discuss that anyway. That would be the perfect week for me. West Ham get through, Everton win Saturday, so we can sort of, the Leeds game is still obviously important on the Sunday, but that's when but I think we're the first. I know we're talking about staying the week, but I think we're the first team to play, aren't we, on Saturday? I think everybody else plays
after 5:30, then Leeds Sunday.
That's it. So that's a big opportunity, isn't it, to put a marker down and scare everybody else on Saturday. So as Joe said, it's going to be an interesting week, even before we kick the ball on Saturday afternoon, isn't it, really? There's lots of movable parts there that affect us indirectly. So yeah, it'd be an interesting few days on the old social media and the Echo website and stuff, keeping up, getting updates.
I mean, Gav's not asking for much there, Joe, is he? Just a West Ham win West Ham get through on Thursday night, Everton win next week. He's not asking for much there, is he? Just, two simple requests that I'm sure, can be fulfilled.
I mean, I'm sure it's perfect. We could include Liverpool beating Leicester as well. So, I mean, you would surely...
Deep inside, maybe, but not...
One word, Bournemouth.
Well, yes, of course.
Yeah. I don't Liverpool in a different place now, aren't they? It's what they were when they played Bournemouth, I think. But, again, these things just have a habit of coming back here, don't they?
Yeah. I think we've all got an easy feeling about tonight, and I think we'll all sleep much better if it goes the way that the odds and the form but point to.
Or an easy feeling about the next couple of weeks, Joe, for being honest.
It's one of those, isn't it? Like it looks likely. Again, obviously, Everton can pull themselves out of this if they go and win it at Wolves. But depends which Everton turns up. Depends which Everton players are available. Well, of course, it depends what Wolves have riding on it. Is it going to be the Wolves that went out and got? Is it going to be the Wolves that went out and got absolutely smashed by Brighton and look like they're on the beach? Or is it going to be the Wolves that turn out the next week and then beating Aston Villa, probably beat the second most informed side in the Premier League, and you're there and you're thinking, what's going on? I tell you what, I am kind of intrigued by next Saturday, because I think it might end up being what the game comes down to a certain extent. It's the prospect of, especially having watched him against Haaland the other day, Yerry Mina versus Diego Costa. That's got trouble written all over it, that hasn't it? I think Costa...
I think that they'll have their own VAR official for if Yerry Mina comes up against Costa, won't they? Just to keep an eye on Everton, that's an interesting one.
So
Guardiola's comments were interesting yesterday, weren't they, about Mina, I thought, at the end.
Even more interesting was Sean Dyche's comments in response to them. Which did raise a good point, actually, Sean Dyche at the centre. Yerry Mina hasn't actually played that many games of football this season, essentially. But, right, gents, I think we will leave things there. I think we've chewed fat enough over all things Everton and Manchester City. But we will, of course, be back on Friday to look back on a huge Sean Dyche pre-match press conference, which we expect should take place on Thursday afternoon. And, of course, look ahead to next weekend's huge game at Molineux as Everton take on Wolverhampton Wanderers in the Premier League. But for today, thank you very much for listening to the Road Blue Podcast.